Welcome back. Now, 38,000 taxpayers have ended their tax residency in South Africa, costing the revenue collector a whopping 3 billion rand. SARS says in 2023, approximately 1,700 millionaires changed their tax residency status, representing almost 5 billion rand in taxable income and almost 2 billion rand in assessed tax. Firstsource Money Executive Director Redge Nkosi joins us for more on this discussion. Very good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you for your time. Why is South Africa losing its millionaires and losing its tax residents?
Well, firstly, it's very difficult to ascertain that the reasons why we're losing these persons. There are essentially two. It could be migration. The second would be taking up income in a different jurisdiction from that of Pretoria. Therefore, they cannot be paying Pretoria any tax if they're earning the income elsewhere outside of Pretoria. So to that extent, therefore, you see that the numbers are going down. But I think this trend has been there for quite a while, where South Africans have been migrating. And it should be seen that it is more of migration than just temporarily taking up residence elsewhere for tax purposes.
Yeah. Can a taxpayer still be a South African citizen while being a tax resident in another or multiple countries?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. For as long as my income is not derived from within the Republic, there's no need for me to be paying the Republic, unless I have some assets here, which then I'll certainly have to be paying should the need for such assets or tax to be paid on those assets. Otherwise, I can be resident in Saudi Arabia, for example, for 5, 10 or so many years. I'll be paying the tax there if they do pay tax, which I don't think they do. But in any other jurisdiction for that matter, you can therefore be a South African, a very well South African, not having changed anything apart from your tax residence only. Yes, but what we know, however, is that we've had quite a few South Africans jumping ship and wanting to settle elsewhere, and that has been rather common. But also, indeed, it has been common that South Africans are working some other places. So we cannot rule out this number as being almost half-half, or anywhere in the regions where the migration is taking up a slightly bigger chunk.
Yeah. So if a person ceases to be a South African tax resident, can they still get taxed on their South African sourced income?
Well, unless the income is sourced domestically, but otherwise it can't be taxed. Remember, the only tax you can pay is when you derive your income from here. I know some people derive income from elsewhere, but it comes in South Africa, but you're based here and you're offering services somewhere. And of course, you have to be taxed in South Africa. But those who completely move out of here and stay in whichever country it is for whatever number of years, they don't have to pay the South African tax system. The only time they can pay is when they have the assets domiciled here. Then certainly they can do that. But otherwise, there's no need for them to be taxed if they're staying in the UK, for example, and earning a living there and staying with their families outside of the jurisdiction of their own birth.
Yeah, what would you say are the demographics when it comes to the tax bracket of those that have been noted to have, decreased the value of taxable income and tax that is paid?
These are fairly mobile people. You're looking at persons who earn no less than over 500,000 rands. So essentially, they're in the regions of over 1 million in real sense. So, yeah, you're talking about people whose consumption is needed in the country for economic growth and so on and so forth. And then we are losing all these persons to outside jurisdictions. Now, demographically, you're looking at persons in the regions of 35 years and upwards. These are fairly educated persons and somewhat established, and largely also a mixture of both black and white, because in the past, of course, there has been quite a number of European-based South Africans going out, but in the recent past, we've seen quite a number of Africans also moving out of the country to pick up positions or pick up jobs outside of the Republic. But in terms of monetary wise, these are persons who frankly earn a lot more than R1 million. There's no doubt about that.
I know you say it's difficult to tell, but what would you say, if you were to say, the kind of official tracking points that perhaps government follows to determine these patterns and these trends?
Oh, yeah, of course, the government is tracking all this, and they're not keeping quiet. They know some are also on the campaign of making sure that South Africans come back home, especially those who have not migrated completely. But even those who have migrated, we know of a campaign a while back when they're trying to pull South Africans back home. But yeah, the numbers are there, statistics are there. And the larger population has been European-based South Africans who have been migrating. But in the recent past, we've seen quite a number of Africans themselves also taking up positions elsewhere.
Yeah.
But I think the general issue here is that these South Africans are earning a lot of money and whose economic activity is well sought in the country. And the loss of that, not just for tax purposes, I think for the economy broadly, in terms of consumption, expenditure, it's not good. It doesn't augur well for the Republic at all.
Yes, and obviously it can't be good for the public purse. How bad can it be when it comes to the consequences of such?
Yeah, absolutely bad. There's no doubt. I mean, remember the South African economy, or rather the framework which South Africa uses for growing its economy is one that depends on tax as revenue. Which revenue must finance or fund economic activities in the country. And where government doesn't fund such type of activities because there's less tax, the implications are easy. It means we have to borrow. You have to pay lots of interest on that. Normally, the borrowing is in external, it could be domestic, but also largely international, as we've seen in the recent past, even if foreign borrowings are in the regions of about 10%. But nonetheless, borrowing and interest rates are pretty high. That may stunt economic growth as a consequence of such people being out of the Republic. So the consequences are many. Outside of consumption, these are supposed to be investors. They're supposed to invest in their own country. They're supposed to be SMMEs. Come up with new companies and so on, and therefore create employment and grow the economy. Then we end up losing. The consequences are quite ghastly, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so clearly something is going wrong if these people are divesting and going to other countries. What incentives can government look at to try and woo these people back and their millions into the country?
I think the first thing that we have to know is South Africa is a highly taxed country. And if the government is to think about one thing, is to lessen the tax that is imposed on the citizens. It's not just the pay as you earn, as we've come to know, that all manner of taxes that are piled on a citizen. And we think that's overbearing. And people decide then, what's the future if I have to surrender almost half of my earnings to government? Yet perhaps I'm not even able to get good services, no good roads and stuff like that. So government has to devise a system where they're going to have to lessen the tax on the citizens, but fundamentally they have to grow the economy. With opportunities of doing business should be heightened, supporting small businesses, supporting other businesses as well. That it is possible, therefore, for all these people who want to go outside to stay at home and begin to take up the opportunities that the government is creating, and government has to do that. Including as well what people call creating the environment necessary for small business to develop. But, that is common. But largely for me is to ensure that the economy is growing and governments have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, but the current government policies, are we likely to see this changing anytime soon, or is this trend likely to just continue happening?
I'm afraid there's nothing in the government policy regimes that we see from our side that would change anything, as we've talked about, things like growing the economy. The economy won't grow for another half a decade or more as a consequence of the policy regime South Africa has adopted. Remember, South Africa doesn't have its own regime. It has adopted the the IMF World Bank system of economic system. And that is a system that has never developed any country anywhere. And we continue to labor under this regime. Many careful economists have in fact advised government to stay away from it. But South Africa does not, only listens to this type of Eurocentric approach to growing the economy. It has never supported any mighty economic growth anywhere on earth. Europe is floundering as a consequence of this policy regime that Pretoria has adopted, which is also quite common in Europe. Places where vibrancy is occurring, as you perhaps very well know, is in Asia. And they don't have the policy framework that South Africa has. So unless South Africa changes, I'm afraid the future is quite bleak for most of us. And migration will certainly continue. The tax base is going to be eroded. And the consequences, therefore, many that arise as a consequence of this will be certainly on our way, no doubt.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, to say what is international best practice? Where should South Africa be looking at in terms of policy that can kind of reverse this damage that we're seeing? And you've mentioned Asia. Which country in particular would you say?
Firstly, before I get to Asia, let's get back to Europe. Let's go to the US. US, for the growth that we've come to see in the US, was because of a deliberate government intervention in the system. Forget the story of market economy and this and that. That's not the issue. Even today, as we speak, US is highly interventionist, but it plays a clever interventionist role. So the growth of the US economy was on the back of very clear government intervention. But that intervention was mixed with private sector as well. Now, get to Europe. Germany is the primary example that South Africa perhaps need to copy. It is the one economy in Europe that has been growing consistently over a period of time, but also fairly inexpensive then, but of course now it has changed. But the growth framework that Germany adopted from as early as 1933 to somewhere in 70s and 80s is one South Africa should be copying. But that's the very growth framework that Japan copied. Hence, we came to see Japan becoming the second largest economy on earth. And with the other Asian economies like Taiwan, Singapore, and so on, adopted similar frameworks. And China today is the only country that in fact embraces and continues to pump use this type of economic framework that was well developed in Germany. But also the German economy was also, the American economy also copied part of the German framework. So you can see that it's a fairly interventionist framework where the government purposefully directs credit or capital to its citizens for development. In this country, I'm afraid that's not the case. So Asia, we generalize and say Asia, but you can call on China, you can call on previous Japan and the tiger economies.
Mr. Nkosi, your insights are certainly appreciated. Thank you so much for your time. That's the Firstsource Money Executive Director, Redge Nkosi, there just speaking to us this afternoon.